Well, good morrow to thou all. And I have apparently don't have enough BCP knowledge to carry on a conversation much past that, but it's very good to be with you here today. Today, wherever it is for yourself, you have stumbled across Calling from the Wilderness with myself, Timothy Miller. I almost didn't even say my own name right, which is just a difficult place to start. Timothy Miller here in Highgate in England. I'm a parish priest in the Church of England and joined by my very good friend on the other side of the world, Derek Wilson. And he's at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Duncan, BC, which is on the Vancouver Island. A few weeks back, for those who were listening and are still with us, this week marks Derek's potentially uneventful journey. So at the end of this episode, Derek is off to go get a bunch of things, including his testing done, and with the hopes of taking flight and crossing the border into that southern country, which we're still not sure if God is in or not, but we keep praying for them. So yes, come back next week, if for nothing else, but to see if Derek really did make his trip and how things are south of the border. Derek, you got anything you'd like to add on that?
No, but the way you're talking makes me feel like I'm, Frodo with the ring going to Mount Doom. There's gonna be perils. You don't know what
Yeah,
you're gonna go up against, but hopefully it all
yeah.
works out. I got Gandalf, my flight helper advisor, gonna help me out and
There you
do it.
go.
Yeah, I think I've
Stick
got
it.
everything set up. But as we all know, with these crazy times, that doesn't equate to a
Yeah.
hill of beans sometimes. So I may get there and get turned around and then nothing ever happened, or I get down there and I get stuck, or I get down there and I come back and the right appointed time and everything worked out and it was a great trip and that. But something's gonna happen.
I love it. At
One
the
of those
right
three is gonna happen.
at the right appointed time. At the very least, we'll pray
I
for the
am
Eagles.
predestined to
Yeah.
come back
That's right.
at this time, and if it doesn't happen,
Oh gosh. The
Bible's wrong.
powers and principalities. Yeah. At Mountain Doom, we'll pray for the Eagles. Um, if you've survived through this
Michael
last
has been battling the armies of Persia, and I am going down there, and is making a way for me. That's
might
in the
have just been
Bible
a
somewhere, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah, 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 yeah. It
Ezekiel or
might have
something.
not been Persia itself, might just been a Persian restaurant. We're not sure. Um,
Persian donuts, like you only get in Thunder Bay, Ontario. That's the only place they make them. Is these Persian, kind of like cinnamon
okay.
roll buns, but like
Yeah.
with strawberry cream on top, strawberry cherry kind of cream
Hmm.
icing. It's
Yeah.
phenomenal. And it's only made in Thunder Bay, Ontario.
Ooh, there you go. Pilgrimage to the Holy Land of Thunder Bay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Excellent. Well, that had nothing to do with anything that we're going to be talking about today. So, welcome once again to Calling from the Wilderness. And today we are on our 33rd session, which, yes, feels a strange one to come to. And we're in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7. And so this week is the final few verses of chapter 7 of Matthew. And so what we're going to do is going to be looking at verses 24 to 29 this week, and then next week we're going to actually go through the entirety of the chapter together and pick up a few of the questions that we had that have kind of come up over the last couple of weeks. I've been trying to make notes and be a bit more kind of diligent and a bit more professional about our final week. But if you have any questions or any thoughts along the way, please do add them in, send a comment, send us a message, carrier pigeon, we'll accept anything. And yeah, we want, as always, want this to be kind of part of a conversation. So Derek and I enjoy being able to converse with each other, and this is kind of part of our own, I guess, kind of discipline of our friendship and the time that we kind of seek to invest in, but we want it to be something bigger and hopefully more impactful and helpful, not only for each other, but also for you who are joining us as well. So this whole thing it's shaped around smaller passages of the Bible the chance to kind of sit and ask the question, kind of, what is God saying, or what is God doing? What is the question for us? And does this have any relevance to our lives and to the world today? So, and Derek is saying, prophetically, not at all. Not
It was
at
written
all.
over 2,000 years ago. I doubt it. Okay. Just
Well, here we
kidding.
go.
That's
I'm gonna prove you
sarcasm.
wrong, Derek. I'm gonna prove you wrong. Anything else you want to add, Derek, before we jump in?
Nope. Let's pitter patter. Let's get at her.
Excellent. All right. So today, as I say, this is Matthew 7, verses 24 to 29. I'm going to ask Derek to read first, then we're going to have a moment of silence afterwards. I'll read it a second time, we'll have another moment of silence. Then invite an opportunity to kind of feedback words or phrases that have been jumping out to us, give a thought or a question that we might have about this passage and something we want to talk about, set a timer for 20 minutes and dive in. So Derek, why don't you start us off?
All right. Reading from Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 29. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes.
Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowd were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, and not as their scribes. Well, Derek, here we are. The wise and foolish builders. What have you got?
Wherever you are, there you are.
Do you have a
Okay.
word or phrase from the passage that jumped out to you when we were reading?
Um, the not as their scribes kind of jumped out to me.
Mm.
Um, and the difference between the rock and the sand,
Mm.
I
Mm.
think. How about you?
Yeah, I think the word that kind of just hit me both times was authority.
Mm.
He was teaching as one who had authority, not as their scribes. So do you have any thoughts or questions you want to kind of throw into the pot before we start our timer?
Um, no, because if I get going, I'm not gonna stop for the timer.
Right.
So
All right. Well,
better just get at her. How about you?
um, yeah, I want to talk about the fact that this is framed around hearing the words of Jesus and doing them, and then that question of like, Jesus is someone teaching with authority. So All right, I'm going to start the timer. So, where do you want to start, Derek?
So he's giving this in reference to his Sermon on the Mount, correct? The previous 2 chapters and all the things he said there. And from what I read out of the Sermon on the Mount, what he's saying is quite different than the way we live our lives. He's kind of preaching about a new way of living.
Mm-hmm.
Say, don't hate anyone or don't kill anyone. I say, don't hate. Don't, be adultery. I say, don't lust. Don't blah, blah, blah. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit and, the Beatitudes and all these kind of counter ways that we would live. And I'm wondering if the rock is, if we live that way, like let's say the waves and the um, winds crashing and all this kind of stuff come at us. It's not that we don't have that happening or that it's not happening to us, but the rock on his teaching is a way to handle those things that come at us. So if, terrible things happen, name it, and if it's happened to you, then look at what he's said, and that helps you deal with whatever it is. It's not so much like growing up, I was like building a house on the rock. Yeah, that's Jesus. So I'm going to build my house on Jesus.
Yeah.
But it's his teachings. It's what he's talked about right now. So what is he saying when things go terrible? Don't have any examples or whatever, but or like you lose someone. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Okay. Oh, financially, I'm not doing too well. Well, he talks about there in money or worry. I'm worried about all this kind of stuff. Well, do not worry because like all these things that come at you in life. He's saying, look at what I've just written. Follow these teachings because they're so different, upside down from what the normal reactions are, that they will help you deal with whatever winds and rains and floods come at you. It's open to you right here. And then if you just do the opposite, like what kind of society or whatever, or our human nature or whatever it be says what to do, put all your money in finances while the stock market crashes and everything, then you tumble. If you find your value in other people and what they think of you, and all of a sudden that goes away, then you lose that and you fall apart because you don't have the teachings. It's not just Jesus himself, it's his teachings. Because if we say build the rock on Jesus, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Just go to any church and be a part of any meeting, and you'll understand that Jesus is a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that distinction is really important because, as you say, kind of growing up, building the house on the rock was building it on Jesus, but it was building it on a right belief of Jesus. And I think as you say, what's interesting is actually the way that the passage is laid out as we have it here
Sorry,
before us.
can I just say building it on the right belief in Jesus, as in I have the right belief. You need to believe him the way that I believe him.
Yes.
Not that there is one specific way and you guys have to do that. It's that my way is the best way or their way is the best way. You have to believe Jesus the same way your group or individual does.
Yes.
Go ahead though. Just want to clarify so people understand.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So as you say, it's not just that we're meant to believe on Jesus in the right way, but the right way was what was determined to be right, correct, orthodox within that specific set of parameters of those communities. Yeah, definitely. But as you say, like the interesting thing about the way this is actually written is it's about who hears Jesus' words and does them.
Mm,
That I think is such an interesting challenge of, because it also then hints at the, you know, the separating of the sheep and the goats, which is that the people who in a sense hear Jesus' words and do them also might not realize that's what they're doing. So the people who are building that house on the rock in the midst of storms and things like that are actually the ones who also may not even realize that's what they've done. They've just, you know, heard wisdom and lived in a way that responded to that wisdom, which I think is a you know, a difficult challenge, especially if you take, as you say, if you take out that sense of like Jesus is the rock of right belief to Jesus is the teacher of a new way of living.
mhm.
That kind of removes our ability to kind of hold, I guess, Jesus hostage in some ways to be our power play, our dynamic, right? You know, like let's go back to your Lord of the Rings thing, right? Like the ring of power is in itself not actually a ring of power for the one who wields it, because it actually makes them you know, subservient to the one to who the ring belongs.
Yeah,
But the power and the freedom come to all people when the ring is destroyed. And it's that, and I think that sometimes we you know, we see the rock as being, as you say, that kind of, you know, that right stable place, so that when everybody else's houses is falling apart because they don't believe Jesus in the right way, then we can be like, oh, it's okay, come to us, we've got all the answers.
yeah.
um but it actually might be our houses that are actually falling apart.
Hmm. Yeah, and while you're talking there, it made me think of, following Jesus's teachings.
Mm.
That's not limited to the Bible. Like, if we are thinking that God is everywhere and speaking to people, and if, like the Bible says, nature speaks of God's goodness and grace, then He could be speaking to people outside of our organization, outside of our communities in a real way. Like, if God is love and truth and peace, then people that are spreading love, truth, and peace that may not fit into our box are still following the teachings of Jesus, whether they're aware of it or not.
Today's
Or am I wrong?
theological
Like,
today's theological bomb drop has been brought to you by Derek Wilson of St. Andrews. Yeah. No,
well, no,
you're
like,
absolutely right. You're
like,
absolutely right. Yeah.
yeah. So let's talk about C.S. Lewis, The Final Battle, where Aslan's battling this other group, and there's one soldier, and it's been years since I've read this, long time, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but he he was battling against Aslan, and Aslan
Mm.
wins, and um he was like, oh, all these terrible things are going to happen or whatever, and Aslan's like, you showed loyalty, you showed uh courage, you showed, and he names all these things, and he's like, all these things are from me, you just didn't do them on the right side, but I will honor all these things that you've done. Come with me. So,
Mm.
and I trust C.S. Lewis with my life, so if he says it.
With my eternal
With my,
salvation. Yeah.
but like,
No,
it's,
yeah, yeah.
so what
The,
are, like,
yeah.
are we so focused on, so like in the church here,
Mm.
i'm I'm pushing quite a bit this thought of not doing something and inviting God to help us do whatever we want to do, but
Mm.
see what God's doing even already in the community,
Mm.
and joining him with what he's already doing. If God is at work outside of the church, which I believe he is, then he's talking to people and sharing them and teaching people.
Yeah.
They may not have a reference for what's happening, but if the spirit's moving,
Mm.
something's happening outside of the church. Are we missing it because we're too blinded to say, oh, it has to happen this way, it has to happen in the church, or they're not using the right biblical language to express this? I mean, we just did that talk with Abraham and, I kind of think of the high priest.
Oh, Melchizedek.
Ma- Melchizedek. Like that was outside of
Yeah.
the chosen people, and yet God was still speaking and moving with him. And you see that in Bible with Jesus, like the Samaritans and all this
Mhm.
kind of stuff, like the Good Samaritan, like that's he was doing the work of Jesus, like caring and loving people outside of the chosen people. In fact, uh, the Israelites would have thought that he was the enemy, like very,
Yeah.
very terrible person, and yet
Mhm.
God's moving outside of the chosen people. He's moving outside of the church, and the church can either close up and say, "Hey, everyone, come here to get God," or we can say, "God, where are you moving outside? We want to join with you."
Yeah.
I think Larry Moore would say, like, revival isn't when everyone comes to the church; it's when the church goes to everyone,
Mm.
and
Mm.
makes sense to me.
Mm. No, I think that's really good. I think as you say that one of the sticking points for the church has unfortunately been i- in what we've not perceived as the box we've put God in, which is, we say God's love is unconditional and that God is love. Um, and then we're like, oh, maybe we're just not extending that sense of God's love enough to recognize that it actually is unconditional. We put conditions on God's love, right? But
Yeah.
actually that question of if God is love, and if there is love in different parts of the world, then by virtue that love must be a part, as you said, with the example from C.S. Lewis, that love must then be a part of God, or God must be a part of that love if there's any truth in that love. And and we do God, and we do the ministry that we're called to, and we do life in itself and injustice when we say that, that unconditional open love of God can only happen within these specific constructs and framework. And I guess that's the thing. Like I remember really struggling um to have to come to terms with the fact that there was abusive relationships in the church, um, because in my mind abusive relationships couldn't take place in the church because it was within the church that relationships were loving, were unconditional, were open, were forgiving, were merciful, were compassionate. Um, and to realize actually that just because we slapped Christian on it or put it in a specific construction or worldview didn't actually all of a sudden make it pure and good, which then means that the inverse must also be true, that the places where they don't use that construct and that worldview and that space, but has some attention to things that are beauty, true, yeah, beautiful, true, loving, light, hope, life, whatever those, all the eternal characteristics of God we might like to talk about, then God must somehow also be in that, and be working in that and through that and calling people to something that is life-giving. And I think you're right, is and I was really struck and challenged as you were saying, if what Jesus is saying here is really the culmination of the Sermon on the Mount. He's asking us to look back on those words that he's spoken in the Sermon on the Mount, which when you actually read back to them aren't aren't very they're not the kind of statements of belief and faith that we make people sign up to then say, now
Mhm.
you belong. They are, as you say, an orientation of life which commits ourselves to something, and commits to a way of being with other people, that doesn't fit very easily or very simply in boxes, in places, and actually doesn't give us a whole lot of power and position,
Mm.
which is, I think, is something that we
I think it
kind of
strips
struggle
away our power and position. I think
with.
it I don't say we lose all control, but we don't desire it. Like we
Mhm.
desire the benefit of our the other people around us
Mhm.
over ourselves. And even if things happen to us, then that's a way in which we can help others. Like it's always, it's never just for us, right? And I believe that's what the church community is. Like it's never just for us. It's for us to share. It's for us to grow together. It's yeah.
Yeah. So that makes me like just talking about power. Then makes me think of this kind of the last two verses when Jesus finished saying these things. The crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes.
Okay, so scribes, um, I assume they're just the ones that have been copying down the the
They
the
got like
Bible and letters and stuff. Like they're not actually ones that think or do. They're just copying. Or am I wrong with that?
no, I think it would be. I think it would be like teachers in the sense they wouldn't necessarily be like rabbis like or Pharisees. They wouldn't be like religious power, but I think they would still be. I think they would still would have been seen as people who had like authority or kind of skill or position to teach.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but I don't
Yeah,
know. Yeah, I'm reading into it a little bit, so that,
maybe. Well, I'm
yeah.
just thinking scribes, like the you know the ones in the Bible, the ones when
Monks.
Christianity became the powerful religion in the Roman Empire, and people are like, I'm leaving, I'm going to the hills, I'm just going to copy the Bible, and they just go the hermit monks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it is like it what's interesting, I think, is that you know again,
Dean Pinter, if you are watching this,
correct us. Yeah.
correct us.
But it is like that way that actually we, when I heard these verses when I was younger, or when I was taught them when I was younger, was taught by people who were very convincing and convicted that we were talking about building your life on a right belief of Jesus. And by proclaiming that, you were also holding the same authority to teach and bring people into truth that Jesus was. And now I'm reading that. I'm like, I don't, I feel like that kind of Jesus authority, and I think that word is probably pretty poor because
Yeah.
I think it's, I guess maybe authority is that sense of like teaching and with a conviction that what you're talking about is right. But it's not a power dynamic of 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 like being convinced or having other people be convinced that you are the absolute right true, or that this is the only way to be or believe in the world. Because I think, when you take that into the context of like especially the things that Jesus is saying about, like, being salt and light, caring for those who are not cared for, recognizing those who are being blessed and set apart, or those who don't fit the stereotypes for power and privilege and position. So authority then for me is that sense that, like, actually, as you say, like, this is a conviction about how the world can be and how we can live in the world in a new way, but isn't about people getting positions and power for themselves.
Yeah, because I would say like all the Sermon on the Mount is all figuring out what it means for you, right? Like, does Jesus actually want us to cut out our eyes? No? Okay, then what is he talking about? What does it mean to be salt and light or cities on a hill? What does it mean when he says, don't hate?
Mm.
What does he mean by this? And that's why, like, there's no authority because there's conversation between people reading this, trying to figure out what how to apply this to our lives. Like it's okay, so how does this work with you? How does it work with me? How does it work in our community together? I don't think it really works if you have one guy going, "Hey, this is exactly how it looks like in our community. We need to do exactly this." It's okay. Let's And that's why the body of Christ is so important. Like we talked a couple weeks ago about our different journeys and how God has taught us different things and shown different parts of himself. So we can get us all together and talk about it and be like, okay, how does this work? How do we live this out? How do we be the house built on the rock and not the sand?
Mm. Mm. That's our timer's going. That's
Okay.
20 minutes.
That's a good place.
Yeah. Anything you want to sign off with before you travel into Mordor?
No, I could really go for an elven cloak just to cover me in the airport or something if I need to, or
Yeah.
some kind of weapon. They don't let me
Yeah.
take swords, but
You
America,
take
I
your
think I can
plunger
get
and a
one down
wrench.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll take my
Oh, God.
Bible, the sword of God.
If you're as concerned with Derek's safety as I am, you can send donations for Derek's weaponry at
My medical bills,
yeah,
so I won't get beat
paypal.me.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All
uh,
right.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us. And next week, as I said, we'll be back with the whole of Chapter 7. So we'll be looking at this in the context of some of the other things that have come before it, a bigger piece of that kind of Sermon on the Mount. And I don't know what you think, Derek, but I've been really surprised. I think basically every time we've done this round of 4, where when we get to the 4th week and look back at everything, how some of it does actually sound and feel different, seeing it taken apart and then put back together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So invite you to join in with us on that as well.
Absolutely.
There you go. Well,
All
before I
right.
end up in an awkward ramble like I did in the beginning, we're going to sign out and say it's been lovely to see you, lovely to be with you, and we'll see you again next week.
Blessings.
Take care.
Toodles.
Peace.